This one's going to be a little bit about the war and some of the issues that we faced during the time of the war, World War II. One of the things we had to do during World War II was have food rationing or gas rationing and several other things. But ration books were prevalent during that time, and everybody had to have them. Everybody did have them. If you didn't have a ration book, you didn't get it to buy your products. And one of the things that we had, because there were so many of us, we had ration stamps when everybody else would run out. We still had stamps to buy things. We didn't have stamps when we had money to buy. It was generally the way it worked. You had to have stamps to buy butter, you had to have stamps to buy sugar, you had to have stamps to buy gas. There were a number of things that you had to have to buy these different products that you needed. And they were a very important part of the process of getting through the war. And the reason those things were so rationed is because they were of limited supply, and the military needed so many of these products that they rationed the people so that they wouldn't use all the products up from the military. And people resented it, especially after the war had been in progress for 2 or 3 years. The people really resented having to use these ration books. But Mother was very fortunate, and she was a very good manager, and she appreciated having the ration books because she could always trade stamps for the different things that she needed when she was short of money. And sugar was one of the things that she certainly could do because Mother was we didn't use a tremendous amount of sugar at our house. Mother didn't cook with a lot of sugar, and so she was able to trade the sugar, and we made our own butter, so she could certainly trade off the stamps for butter. And gas, we got the gas stamps because we owned a car, but she could use the gas stamps to trade for rides when we needed to go to Enid or we needed to go someplace. She could trade gas stamps for a ride with someone to take her, which turned out to be a really good deal. And it worked to our advantage always that the ration books worked for us, and that was a good thing. People living on the farm had less problems with the ration books than those people living in the cities, and many people complained about them a great deal because the ration books were such a pain. But for us, it was not that big a deal. I remember Mother talking about pepper being one of the problems, that pepper was rationed. And she never quite understood that, but we were a family that didn't use much pepper. In the fact of the matter, she laughed about a pound of pepper lasting for our family the whole wartime. The whole time the war was going on, we'd only used a pound of pepper. And she said she was able to get rid of all of her ration stamps for pepper because we didn't ever use that much pepper, so it didn't matter. She just didn't cook with pepper, so it didn't matter. We didn't eat pepper. She hardly ever put pepper on the table.
Well, the stamps for specific things, I noticed it says coffee and then it says spare.
Sometimes you had extras that you could use, right? Now, I can't give you all the absolute specifics, Stanley, because you have to remember that's been a long time ago and I was a kid.
Well, how old were you?
Well, I was 7 years old when the war started. Okay.
So, they kind of became a barter system.
Well, it did.
Kind of became money, like money.
For us, it did.
Yeah.
Because we had plenty.
Now, you better not tell the president he might want back taxes.
Oh, well, you know how it is. He can take it out in wanting. He can take it out in wanting. He's put in this system today that he's decided people can't save any more than $3 million in their retirement fund now. So, you know.
So you got butter, like you made your own butter.
We churned our own butter.
So you used your butter stamps.
We traded them for other things.
Like a ride to town or
exactly.
something.
Or, or traded them for money.
Mhm.
to do other things. Mother could sell them to someone and take the money and buy other groceries.
And what if they had the stuff? You may have said this, but what if they had the stuff on the shelves at the store, but you couldn't buy it without your stamps?
Then, sorry, you didn't get it. The grocer was not allowed to sell it to you if you didn't have the stamp.
Mhm.
Even though he knew you needed it, he knew you desperately needed it. If you didn't have a stamp, he couldn't sell it to you. Now, he could tell you that Mrs. Dixon might have one. Go
Mm.
see if she could give you one, or you could trade her for one.
Who was keeping tabs on the grocery store?
Well, we never knew when the authorities would come through and check them out.
Mm.
You never knew when they would. But they had to, there was a control on the amount of groceries that was delivered to them, the amount of stuff that was delivered to that grocery store, and they had to turn in stamps for every one of those.
Wow, that's how they
items.
controlled it
That's
right
how
there.
they controlled it.
Mhm. Now, talk a little bit about the resentment, because it was a wartime and everybody was behind the war, and young men were wanting to join up to do their part.
That's right. And in the beginning, there was no resentment. Everybody was just on top of it 100%. We had metal drives, scrap drives, everything. Everybody worked 100%. We had all the women every week went to town and folded old rags for bandages. We did everything in the world we could to help the war drive. The kids gleaned all of the area. We went through every field, every pasture, everything, cleaning up trash, trying to find every piece of metal we could find that they could melt down and use in the factories to make weapons with. Any kind of weapon or ammunition or whatever with. Everything, everybody in the nation turned out to make the war succeed, okay? But towards the end of the war, people were getting tired of it. And so many were being killed, and people were getting worn out with it. And the women had gone to work, and the kids were all tired, and everybody was tired. The grandparents were tired, everybody was tired. People just wear down, is what it amounts to. Did they resent the soldiers? No, they just resented the situation.
Mhm. Maybe the resentment was more just frustration.
Well, it really was a frustration.
Because,
And that came forward. And then, shortly after World War II, we ended up with, there it is, we ended up with the Korean deal.
mhm.
And then that was settled, not with the real end of the war like we wanted, but with that split nation. And that wasn't really as satisfactory as we'd have liked to have seen.
Yeah, and recent history says so.
Right. And then on top of that, not too many years after that, we had this Vietnam thing, which turned out to be a disaster because by then we decided we had to be politically correct, which was a disaster. And people have just been on this PC move ever since, which has been driving the world crazy. And that's why you see the resentment you see today. So it's just, the resentment you see today about war is not even remotely compared to the frustration that there was in World War II.
Talk a little bit about the news. How did you keep up? Because you had, I know Bill Watkins went in the Army during the war, right?
Right. Bill was in the Army.
And did he go to Europe?
He was in the Aleutian Islands.
And who else did we have?
Keith Carnes was in the Merchant Marines. And Keith made several trips overseas with the Merchant Marines. I can't tell you exactly where he went, but he made several trips overseas.
Now, did his ship ever get shot at by German or Japanese subs or anything?
I can't answer that. I can't answer that.
Because
I know he was
shipping
in-
was very dangerous.
Yes, and he was in some very dangerous areas, so I wouldn't be surprised that he did. But he didn't talk about it that much.
Mm.
Most of those guys didn't talk about their problems much.
Now, was Bill Watkins in the Aleutians when the Japanese attacked the Aleutians?
He was there nearby where they attacked. I don't think the actual area where he was attacked. However, it was so close by that at one point he did suffer some frostbite.
Hmm.
And but that's about all I remember of that. Okay?
Did we have anybody else?
Not in the immediate family.
What
Now,
about Elbert or Stanley?
No, they weren't old enough. When Uncle Victor had some stepsons, and they were in the war, but I don't know much about them. Okay,
Mhm.
the McGugan boys, they were in the war, but I didn't. I was too young and didn't really know them. So,
What's the name of that town where Monty and I found the memorials? It was a World War II memorial or a veteran memorial, and it had, I can't remember all the names. I know it had Bill Watkins, it even had Wayne on
was
it.
it Helena?
I think it might have been.
It's probably Helena because that was Bill's home.
Mm.
That was Bill's home. Helena or Ringwood.
I don't remember. I'm
Would have
thinking
been
Helena.
Helena or Ringwood, or between them because Ringwood's right south of Helena. So.
Yeah. So how'd you get your news during the war?
We got our news from the newspaper and from the radio.
And how did you find out? Well, I mean, that was the reason for saving the battery was to
Right.
listen to the war.
And that's the only thing we listened to, and every morning and every evening Dad listened to it. Or maybe at noon and in the evening.
Okay.
I don't remember the mornings, but maybe at noon and in the evening.
How did you get word of who had been killed in battle or whatever?
Well, usually in the newspaper, because it would be on the newspaper every day. In the newspaper, there would be a list in the newspaper, and Dad would go to town many days, and there would be a list in the post office every day. Would be posted in the post office.
And do you remember that as a child?
Yeah. It's a big deal.
You remember hearing about neighbors dying.
Neighbors dying and people dying, and you knew who was overseas and everybody. And you went, all the churches prayed for them every week, and every time you went to the church, and you went to church every time the door opened, everybody prayed for those that were overseas. And you had prayer in your home all the time for the war.
I'm just wondering the impact on the children with so many people dying and people didn't.
Let me tell you, of course, Nash is a small area, and there weren't that many right there that were gone. Probably 15 out of 200, 250 people that were gone at one time, okay? But even so, that's a lot of people considering. But everybody was concerned. And with a father like I had, who had been in World War I, and who was very, very patriotic and very involved in this war. He read every word he could read and wanted to know everything he could know about what was going on with it. And he talked about it constantly. Constantly. He talked about it. You could not know what was happening and live in that family. Whether you was 5 years old or 25, okay? You just had to know what was going on with it because we just lived and breathed it every day. It was that important.
What was Grandpa's one regret?
One regret about?
Monty told me this week that he said he had one regret in his life, and that was voting for FDR.
Oh, yeah, that was Dad's big regret that he voted for FDR the first time he ran because he was so disillusioned with Hoover. And he resented it, he regretted it, and resented himself for having done it till the day he died.
That didn't really have anything to do with the war. He just didn't
No.
like the social programs.
He
Or
just didn't like the social program and welfare. He thought welfare was the worst thing that was ever put on to human beings. He hated welfare.
wonder what he would think if he was here today.
Oh, he couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle what's going on here today.
Mm-hmm.
With his frame of mind, he'd be up there trying to do away with Obama.
So what did he say around the house that about FDR and welfare?
Oh, you don't. It wouldn't be fit to put on this.
Well, tell it in the clean version.
It's been a long time ago.
But he talked about it, and he
talked
he
about
talked
it.
about you need to earn your own living, or what?
Absolutely. Welfare was not the way to go. He said, "Why did I go to France and fight? Why did we go over there and fight? Why are our soldiers over there fighting now if they're going to do the welfare thing? If we're going to have welfare, what are we over there fighting for? That's not what this nation's all about." I mean, he was adamant, absolutely adamant about it. He just didn't understand it at all. And there was a time when we were so poor and hard up that Mother looked at him and said, "Emil, are you sure that we can't take a load of coal?" They would give us a load of coal, and we really desperately need it. We just don't have any fuel. There's no wood. We're just desperate for some way to heat this house.
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure we can't take a load of that coal? And oh, he pitched a living fit. And she looked at him and said, "Then get off your duff and go out and figure out how we're going to get some coal."
And he did.
And he did. He came up with some gold. I never did learn how he did it, but he came up with some gold. Enough coal until he got some work and he could come up with some money to buy some.
How about that?
But she was hostile.
Now,
Mother never got hostile often, but when Mother got hostile, she was hostile. She stomped her foot, put her foot down, it was down.
she didn't exert her authority often, but she did occasionally.
And when she did, he knew it was done.
What about, did you kids work and help pay the bills in any way? Or when you worked, was it your money?
When we worked, generally speaking, it was our money, but we were told what to do with it. We spent it on ourselves, but we had to pay our own bills, okay? We had to pay our own expenses at school. We had to buy our own clothes. If we, like, I had to have glasses, I had to pay for my own glasses. If we had to go to the dentist, we had to pay our own dental bills.
And what did you do? What did you do to earn money?
Well, when I was 11 years old, actually when I was 9 years old, I started babysitting. And I would babysit with Jeanette and Larry Osbald. And I was about as scared as they were, but nevertheless, we survived. I'd go to their house, and they lived out in the country. And the funny part was their outhouse was a good half a block from the house. And it was awful to have to go out there tonight before we went to bed, but we made it. We made it back to the house. We'd go to bed. When it was bedtime, we'd go to bed, and I spent the night with them, so I went to bed too. And most of the time, I didn't even know when their parents came home. And but I'd get up the next morning and catch the bus and go to school. And I would make $1 for doing that. And I'd save
A
those
dollar was a
dollars.
lot of money.
$1 was a lot of money. And I could do that at least once a week. And to have $1 a week was big bucks. And, you know, I could save $2 and have a new pair of shoes. But when I was a kid, there was a couple years that I never had but one pair of shoes the whole year. So to have a new pair of shoes once in a while was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So, hey, I was grateful. When I was 11 years old, we had an old lady in town whose husband died, and Mrs. Carrier, and she was afraid to stay by herself. So every day when it got dark, I went down to her house and spent the night with her all winter long. And finally, her daughter came the next spring and moved her to be with her, where she could live with her. She was 88, I believe. Anyway, took her to live with her. So I lost that job, but that summer I went to work in somebody's kitchen, and I worked out in the kitchen all summer.
What do you mean, a private home
Yeah.
kitchen?
Yeah. And helped with the harvest. And I did that every summer from then on. Worked in somebody's kitchen every summer. And I usually made $3 a day doing that.
Wow.
And would live in their house, and I bought all my own school clothes. I bought all my own glasses. I paid for my eye appointments. But I didn't blow my money. And my brothers all worked on people's farms.
So once you got up in your low teens, you were helping raise yourself.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Dad got sick when I was 12. And he couldn't work at all after that. He couldn't do anything. Mother went back to teaching school that year. So that made things a little easier. But even so, we still had to do what we had to do.
Now, I'm sitting here since you bring that up. Wasn't there a little battle between Grandma and Grandpa about her going back to work or going to work? Now, she had been a teacher before they married, right?
Well, yeah, she was a teacher until, well, she was a teacher when they got married, and then she taught school until she got pregnant. And then Hollis was born dead. And I don't think she went back to teaching then until she went when I was in the 7th grade. She went back to teaching school.
Okay, so George was 5 years younger than
No, I
you?
was in 6th grade. She went back to teaching school.
So George was about first grade?
Yeah.
Okay, now she worked until who was born?
Hollis. Her first baby was born dead. And mother was 25. And he was born dead. And then my sister Dorothy was born after that. And then Claire was born. And Claire was a little boy, and he lived 2 days, and he died. And then Retha and Stanley, Albert, and me, and George.
Was everybody born at home?
All but George.
He was born at Enid.
Enid.
And so was there a midwife, or how'd that work? Neighbor ladies come in? How did that work?
Actually, the doctor delivered
Mm.
everybody. The doctor delivered everybody.
Mm-hmm.
After Hollis was born, Hollis weighed 14 pounds.
Wow.
And he was so large, and that's what killed him. He was too big for mother to deliver. In today's society, they would have taken him cesarean and he would not have died. But at that point, they didn't have that option. And so delivery killed him and nearly killed mother. Okay. Anyway, mother had to have some major surgery after that. But she recovered from that. But anyway, mother was just like a few days being 44 when George was born.
Okay, well, we're kind of running over, so we're going to have to call it quits on this one.
Okay.